have the time and take a stroll in your mind. In August of '64, a Tonkin Gulf incident ignites a war. Admiral Morrison gets attacked, then America strikes back. Weird scenes inside the canyon. Weird scenes inside the canyon. Military kids depart the hill, and into the canyon they will fill. They protest people who kill, but are they any different still? Weird scenes inside the canyon. Weird scenes inside the canyon.
Welcome to my summary of David McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. This is part 16, chapter 18, The Wolf King of L.A., Papa John Phillips. This series is based on a book, so it's best to start at the beginning. I'll leave a link to chapter 1 in a pinned comment. Please subscribe, like, comment, and thanks for watching. Chapter 18, The Wolf King of L.A., Papa John Phillips.
John Phillips was the ultimate controller.
Mama's and Papa's producer-manager Lou Adler.
She was practically his slave.
Michelle Phillips describing John's relationship with his third wife, Genevieve Waite. Thus far in this journey, we've seen how what are arguably the two most bloody and notorious mass murders in the history of the City of Angels. The murders of the occupants of the home on CeeLo Drive in Benedict Canyon, and the so-called four-on-the-floor bludgeoning murders of 4 drug dealers on Wonderland Avenue, were directly connected to the Laurel Canyon music scene. But the city of Los Angeles can boast one other particularly notorious murder, one that stands to this day as both the most gruesome single-victim murder and the most famous unsolved murder in the city's history. On January 15, 1947, the mutilated body of aspiring actress Elizabeth Short was found posed in a field. The ritualistically butchered body was nude, sliced cleanly in half, and completely drained of blood. Parts of the body had been removed, after which the corpse had been thoroughly sanitized. Bruising clearly indicated that the young girl had been savagely beaten. Forensic evidence suggests that she had been forced to eat feces during her torturous ordeal. She was quickly dubbed the Black Dahlia, and it is by that name that she is known and written about today. Much of what has been written about the brief life of Ms. Short is contradictory. Among the facts that seem to be agreed upon are that she had recently worked at a military facility that is now known as Vandenberg Air Force Base, and that she had some kind of close connection to a U.S. Naval hospital in San Diego, where she may have also worked. That is, in any event, what she had indicated in a letter to her mother. Unlike the Manson and Wonderland murders, the mutilation of Black Dahlia occurred some 20 years before Laurel Canyon's glory days. There is, nevertheless, a possible connection. This story begins on August 30th, 1935, with the birth of John Edmund Andrew Phillips to parents Claude and Edna Phillips. Claude was a retired Marine Corps officer and engineer. His father, John Andrew Phillips, who had been a prominent and influential architect, one day mysteriously fell to his death on a construction site, according to John Phillips' autobiography. John's mother, Edna, had to what most people would consider a decidedly unconventional upbringing. Her mother was a psychic and a faith healer, and many of her 11 siblings were well known locally as gunfighters and bandits. When Edna was just a year old, she was reportedly kidnapped by gypsies. Not to worry, though, her father allegedly found her a year later down in Mexico, though how he would have done so will doubtless forever remain a mystery. Edna was just 15 when she met and began a relationship with Claude Phillips, who, according to legend, had supposedly won an Oklahoma bar from a fellow serviceman in a poker game on his way home from France at the close of World War I, which seems, in retrospect, about as credible as various other aspects of the Phillips family history as told by John. By 18, Edna had given birth to the couple's first child, Rosie Phillips, born on New Year's Eve, 1922. Rosie would later become a career employee of the Pentagon, where John's first wife would also find work. Years later, according to John, Rosie's daughter Patty would be found dead of an overdose in a girlfriend's apartment in North Hollywood. There are mysterious questions surrounding her death. This is the kind of thing that tends to happen to families in Laurel Canyon. In the late 1920s, Claude Phillips was commissioned to Haiti, where he remained for 4 years. He was then sent back to Quantico, then shipped off to Managua, Nicaragua, before finally returning to Alexandria, Virginia, where John Phillips, who would become arguably the most important music figure in the canyon, grew up and went to school. John attended a series of strict Catholic and military schools. He also served as an altar boy, though according to his own account, he also had a darker side which included forays into vandalism, auto theft, breaking and entering, fighting, and other assorted mischief. His mother, meanwhile, routinely cruised for men when not spending time with a U.S. Army colonel named George Lacey. John would later be told that his real father was a U.S. Marine Corps doctor named Roland Meeks, who died in a Japanese POW camp during World War II. Phillips played basketball at George Washington High School, graduating in 1953. He then scored an appointment to Annapolis Naval Academy, but soon dropped out. One of his first paying jobs was working on a fishing charter boat. As John later recalled it, the crew consisted of him, a retired Navy officer, and 4 retired Army generals. Seems like a perfect fit for one of the future guiding lights of the hippie movement. Phillips also, for a brief time, tried his hand at selling cemetery plots. As noted at the beginning of this odyssey, John's first wife was the aristocratic Susie Adams, a direct descendant of President John Adams and an occasional practitioner of voodoo. The couple's first son, Jeffrey, was born on Friday the 13th in December of 1957. Shortly after that, John found himself in, of all places, Havana, Cuba, just as the Batista regime was about to fall to the revolutionary forces of Fidel Castro. According to Phillips, he and his traveling companions
were once whisked off the street by a director, straight into a TV studio to appear on a live Havana variety show.
Many of you, I'm sure, have had a similar experience. 6 months later, in 1958, Phillips flew to Los Angeles and began performing on amateur nights at Pandora's Box on the legendary Sunset Strip. His first band, the Journeymen, featured Phillips, Scott McKenzie, and Dick Wiseman. It was while touring in this formation that John Phillips met a very young Holly Michelle Gilliam. Michelle was born November 10, 1944 in Long Beach, California, to a father variously described as a merchant marine, a movie producer assistant, and a self-taught intellectual. When Michelle's mother, a Baptist minister's daughter, reportedly died of a brain aneurysm when Michelle was just 5, Gardner Gilliam took his daughters and promptly relocated to Mexico, ostensibly to attend college on the GI Bill. They remained there for several years. Upon their return to Southern California, Gill found work as an LA County probation officer. According to John, Gill's work
Often required him to go out of town.
though one would think that would make it rather difficult for him to keep tabs on his charges. In 1958, while future husband John was vacationing in war-torn Cuba, Michelle found a new mother figure in 23-year-old Tamar Hodel. Tamar's father, Dr. George Hodel, was described by Vanity Fair in December of 2007 as
the most pathologically decadent man in Los Angeles,
and
the city's venereal disease czar and a fixture in its A-list demi-monde.
also noted in the article was that
George Hodel shared with Man Ray a love for the work of the Marquis de Sade and the belief that the pursuit of personal liberty was worth everything.
in other words, Hodel embraced the all-purpose Luciferian creed, do what thou wilt. According to the same article, Tamar and her siblings had
Grown up in her father's Hollywood house, which resembled a Mayan temple, was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright's son, and was the site of wild parties, in which Hodel was sometimes joined by director John Huston and photographer Man Ray.
The luxurious home reportedly features, among other amenities, a subterranean walk-in vault, which is always a nice thing to have around. Within the walls of that singularly odd Hollywood Hills home, which lies about 3 miles due east of the mouth of Laurel Canyon, Tamar has talked about how she
often uncomfortably posed nude for dirty old Man Ray and had once wriggled free from a predatory John Huston.
her own father, not so shockingly, had committed incest with her.
When I was 11, my father taught me to perform asterisks on him.
Her father also plied her with erotic books, grooming her for what he touted as their transcendent union, and freely shared her with his wealthy and influential friends. To the girl's horror, she became pregnant, at the tender age of 14, with her father's child. To her greater horror, she says,
My father wanted me to have his baby.
a friend nevertheless took her to get an abortion. Dr. George was so incensed that, according to Marr, he struck her on the head with his pistol, prompting her stepmother, who also happened to be John Huston's ex-wife, to assist her in going into hiding. Dr. George Hodel was arrested and charged with, among other things, offering his young daughter to several friends at an orgy. The sensational 1949 incest trial featured a witness who took the stand to describe being hypnotized by Hodel at a party. Allegations that the rich and powerful were dabbling in incest, hypnotism, pedophilic orgies, and Luciferian philosophies must surely have been shocking to Angelenos in the 1940s, as they would still be to most Americans today. Perhaps that's why the jury chose not to believe Tamar and instead acquitted Dr. Hodel. Of course, it should probably be factored in that Tamar was roundly vilified by both the Jerry Giesler-led defense team and the local press. Far more shocking than the allegations aired at trial was the then unknown fact, even while Hodel was standing trial on the sensational charges, he was, and still is today, a prime suspect in the Black Dahlia murder case. There have been, to be sure, numerous suspects identified in the case, including actor-director Orson Welles. But George Hodel does seem to be a much more likely suspect than most of those who have been identified. And his possible guilt, it should be noted, does not exclude others from likely complicity as well. The mistake that virtually all investigators of this case have made is assuming that there is only one culprit. It is entirely possible that Hodel committed the crime in conjunction with various others in his Luciferian social circle. Photographer Man Ray, for example, is a compelling suspect, given that the posing of Miss Short's body appeared to mimic the Minotaur, one of his better-known photographs. It seems unlikely that the 14-year-old daughter of a lowly probation officer would fall into the orbit of the daughter of a very wealthy and well-connected George Hodel, but not any more unlikely, I suppose, than the numerous other aspects of the Laurel Canyon saga. Tamar, who had been described by Michelle as the epitome of glamour, quickly took the youngster under her wing, buying her clothes, enrolling her in modeling school, teaching her to drive, and providing her with a fake ID and a steady stream of prescription drugs. Obtained, one would presume, from her father. According to Michelle,
Tamar put on perfect airs around my dad, and when it became necessary, she would sleep with him.
that perhaps explains why, in early 1961, Gil didn't have a problem with allowing his underage daughter to move to San Francisco with their surrogate mom. Soon enough, Tamar found herself in a relationship with journeyman Scott McKenzie, and bandmate John Phillips began coming by Tamar's and Michelle's room on a nightly basis. It wasn't long before Michelle, still just 16, was romantically involved with the 25-year-old Phillips, despite the fact that John was still married to and living with Susie Adams, with whom he by then had 2 children, Laura Mackenzie Phillips having been born on November 10, 1959, in, naturally enough, Alexandria, Virginia. Father Gill, who had recently taken a 16-year-old bride of his own, one of a string of 6 wives, still wasn't concerned. And it's probably safe to assume that Philip's father, who had pursued his bride when she was just 15, wouldn't have been too concerned either. In October of 1962, a year or so after meeting Michelle, John curiously found himself in Jacksonville, Florida, alongside Naval Air Station Jacksonville and Naval Station Mayport for 2 weeks' rest and rehearsal. That just happened to coincide with the Cuban Missile Crisis. For a guy who, in his own words,
Never felt comfortable with political advocacy.
John seems to have taken a keen interest in Cuban affairs. 2 months later, on New Year's Eve 1962, Holly Michelle Gilliam became John Phillips' second wife. She also joined his reconfigured band, as did Canadian Denny Doherty, who had formerly been with the Mugwumps alongside Cass Elliot. This new lineup was dubbed the New Journeymen. The newly formed trio promptly embarked on a drug-fueled Caribbean adventure, arriving first at St. John's, where John claimed that they
Snorkeled on acid.
for several weeks. Next, they ferried over to St. Thomas, where they set up a camp at the dive beachfront boarding house known as Duffy's. Soon enough, Ellen Naomi Cohen, better known as Cass Elliot, showed up with John's nephew, who was a childhood friend of hers. Cass had been born in Baltimore, but had grown up in Alexandria, where, like Philip, she had attended George Washington High School. As the legend goes, Cass waited tables at the dive while the trio performed folk songs. During their time there,
The town was
according to Phillips,
crawling with drunken Marines and sailors on their way home from Vietnam.
moving on from the boarding house, the group next took over an unfinished home on Kirkee Alley, where, according to John, they were known as
The island's open house, and everyone was welcome to our commune.
At some point, though, the governor supposedly ordered them off the island.
Because he thought his nephew was doing drugs with the crazies at Creeker Alley.
The band had formalized its new lineup of John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, Denny Dougherty, and Cass Elliot, and they had a whole album's worth of material written. That first album would feature such enduring classics as California Dreaming and Monday Monday. On none of the band's subsequent albums would they produce anywhere near the level of songwriting that they were able to somehow achieve on that Caribbean adventure. Though isolated on St. Thomas, the songs the group brought back to L.A. with them just happened to be of the previously unheard of but soon to emerge folk rock variety. In his autobiography, Papa John, Phillips quotes Dougherty as saying that everyone was
evolving toward the same sound at the same time without really communicating with each other about it.
It was, I suppose, just the way things are fated to be. Another one of those amazing serendipities. To be sure, Phillips told a number of different versions of the story of the origins of the songs on that first album. One version had California Dreamin' being written in a New York hotel room in the middle of the night, with assistance from Michelle. Another version held that the tune was composed on a drive to L.A. from New York. Yet another version had a song dating back to 1963. Phillips also claimed at times that the song wasn't even written for the Mamas and Papas, but rather for Barry McGuire, who was a hot commodity following the 1965 release of Eve of Destruction. Within a month of arriving in L.A., the band had producer-manager Lou Adler, a Jewish kid who'd grown up in a tough Hispanic section of East L.A., and a record deal, and John and Michelle were at home in a comfortable house on Lookout Mountain in Laurel Canyon. They would soon be able to afford and purchase Jeanette MacDonald's former Bel Air mansion at 783 Bel Air Road, which featured hand-carved wooden gargoyles and a walk-in vault beneath the house, which, as I had already mentioned, is a very handy feature. Sitting on 5 acres, the lavish home, with 5 Rolls Royces in the driveway, was the site of virtually non-stop partying. The new lineup, of course, needed a name, and John pushed hard for the cult-based Magic Circle, a name by which the band was briefly known before ultimately settling on the Mamas and the Papas. They proved to be a rather short-lived band, recording and performing only from 1965 to 1968, with a brief reunion in 1971 to satisfy contractual obligations to their record company. During that time, the band produced 5 albums and 11 top 40 singles. To date, the lineup has sold nearly 100 million albums. The Mamas and Papas freshman album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was released in early 1966 and rose to the very top of the charts. It was all downhill from there. While recording their second album in June of 1966, Michelle was discharged from the band due to the fact that she was having an affair with Denny Dougherty, which caused severe friction in the group. By August, though, she was back, which didn't prevent the group's second album from performing rather poorly. The third, recorded in 1967 and entitled Deliver, failed to live up to its name. Then in June of that year, the Mamas and Papas delivered a closing set at the Monterey Pop Festival that almost everyone agrees was pretty wretched. 2 months after Monterey, the band made their final television appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. 2 months after that, the quartet headed off to Europe while recording their 4th album, The Papas and the Mamas. Shortly thereafter, the band broke up. John tried his hand at a solo career with the unsuccessful release of John Phillips' The Wolf King of L.A., which bore the logo of his own Warlock Records. To satisfy record label demands, the group then briefly reformed for their 4th album, People Like Us. Following that unsuccessful venture, the band once again dissolved. During the heyday of the Mamas and Papas, John and Michelle Phillips knew and regularly played host to virtually everyone of importance in the canyons. In addition to all the singers and musicians living in Laurel Canyon, the power couple's circle of friends included Warren Beatty, Peter and Jane Fonda, Jack Nicholson, Terry Melcher, and girlfriend Candace Bergen, Marlon Brando, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger and Wojtek Frykowski, soon-to-be dead gossip columnist Steve Brandt, Larry Hagman, presidential brother-in-law Peter Lawford, fresh from his alleged involvement in the covering-up murder of Marilyn Monroe, Dennis Hopper, Ryan O'Neal, ethereal Freemason Peter Sellers, and Zsa Zsa Gabor. and a short, scraggly singer-songwriter by the name of Charles Manson. There were, to be sure, numerous ties between the Mamas and Papas and Charles Manson, and between the Mamas and the Papas and the CeeLo Drive victims. John Phillips, for example, had invested $10,000 in Jay Sebring's business venture, Sebring International, which was rumored to have been a front for various illegal activities, including drug trafficking. Michelle Phillips had a brief affair with Roman Polanski in London, while Polanski was married to the soon-to-be murdered Sharon Tate. During that same sojourn to London, Tate was reportedly initiated into the practice of witchcraft. Mama Cass, as previously noted, lived just across the road from the house at 2774 Woodstock Road, occupied by Folger and Frykowski. Both homes were frequently visited by known drug dealers. Regulars at Cass's home included Pick Dawson, also a regular at the Frykowski-Folger home and the Tate-Polanski home, the son of a U.S. State Department official who, according to John Phillips, was suspected by authorities
of using diplomatic pouches to move drugs between countries.
And Billy Doyle, a local dealer who Dennis Hopper claimed was filmed while being flogged at the Tate-Polanski house just 3 days before the murders. Another regular was Bill Mentzer, later convicted of the brutal murder of Cotton Club producer Roy Radin. The LAPD once described Metzer as member of some kind of hit squad. So dark was the scene at the home of the Lady of the Canyon that, according to journalist Murray Terry, four of the LAPD's initial prime suspects in the Tate killings were drug dealers associated with Cass Elliot. And yet, curiously enough, many of the Canyon's peace and love spewing musicians were regulars at Mama Cass's home as well. As Rolling Stone noted in its 40th anniversary edition,
Mama Cass Elliot's cozy canyon house functioned as a sort of rock salon.
In a similar vein, Barney Hoskins wrote in Hotel California that
Cass kept permanent open house.
Also noted in Hoskins' tome was that the Laurel Canyon scene all spun around him and Cass, with the him in this case being David Crosby, who, like Cass, had an insatiable appetite for potent painkillers like Demerol, Dialudid, and Percodan. Crosby was one of the many Canyonites who regularly dropped by Cass's place to hang out and engage in impromptu jam sessions and to mingle with some seriously disreputable characters. Also a regular at Cass's place, by some reports, was Charles Manson himself. According to Ed Sanders, it was at Cass's home that Charlie first met her neighbor, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, who helped finance Kenneth Anger's films like the one that was supposed to star Godo Palakas, but instead starred Mansonite Bobby Beaujolais. According to Murray Terry, the rather notorious Process Church of the Final Judgment, which evidence suggests had deep ties to Manson, Son of Sam, and Cotton Club murders, also came knocking on Cass's door, actively seeking to recruit her, as well as John Phillips and Terry Melcher. Terry has written that the Manson family's iconic bus was seen parked at the home of John and Michelle Phillips in the fall of 1968. Some reports also hold that Manson attended a New Year's Eve party at the couple's home on December 31, 1968, just months before the murders began. So close were the ties between the Mamas and Papas and the Manson clan that both John Phillips and Mama Cass were slated to appear as witnesses for the defense at the family's trial, though neither was ever called. For a band that sang a song about being safe and warm if I was in L.A., the members of the Mamas and Papas kept some pretty dangerous company in the City of Angels. Speaking of dangerous company, not long after the band hit the charts, Tamar Hodel received a postcard from Michelle Phillips asking her to watch their scheduled performance on Ed Sullivan's show, and then to meet the group at San Francisco's Fairmont Hotel before a scheduled concert. Tamar showed up with her father George at her side, the two, as with Graham and Robert Parsons, apparently still maintaining a close relationship. And Tamar, George, John, Michelle, Denny, and Cass embarked on a drug-fueled pre-show odyssey. By 1970, John and Michelle had divorced. Many years later, Michelle would reveal that their time together had included at least one episode of domestic violence, one that she still was reluctant to discuss.
It was serious. I ended up in the hospital. That's all I'll say about it.
The union had yielded John a second daughter, Gilliam Cynthia Phillips, born February 12, 1968 in Los Angeles. On January 31, 1972, John Phillips married for the third time to actress and Crowley aficionado Genevieve Waite. On the wedding guest list were the soon-to-be Governor Jerry Brown and the soon-to-be Lieutenant Governor Mike Curb. The couple's time together would be marked by widely out-of-control drug consumption and the birth of 2 more offspring. Tamara Lane, whose name is perhaps in part a homage to Tamara Hodel, and Bijou Lilly, who was taken away and placed in foster care in Bolton Landing, New York, after her drug-addled parents were deemed unfit to raise her. In June 1972, shortly after marrying Waite, Phillips moved into a canyon home at 414 St. Pierre Road that had been built by William Randolph Hearst. The Rolling Stones had just vacated the property, and their trusty sidekick, Graham Parsons, was still hanging around and would grow very close to John Phillips. Parsons, though, would soon turn up dead, while John would head off to London where he reportedly planned to record a solo album with assistance from Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. That project never got off the ground, however, as Phillips' addiction rendered him impossible to work with. Cass Elliot turned up in London the very next year, but unlike her former bandmate, her trip abroad was to be one way. On July 29, 1974, she was found dead in occasional canyonite Harry Nilsson's London flat. Ms. Elliot, it seems safe to say, knew a little too much about the dark side of Laurel Canyon. Following the dissolution of the Mamas and the Papas, Cass had gone on to a successful solo career and had become a familiar face on American television screens. In addition to hosting 2 primetime network specials, she had guest hosted The Tonight Show and appeared on such popular early 1970s TV shows as The Red Skelton Show and Love American Style. She had been married twice, first in 1963 to vocalist Jim Hendrix in what was reportedly a platonic arrangement aimed at getting Hendrix a draft deferment. During her first marriage, which was annulled in 1968, Cass had given birth to a daughter, Owen Vanessa Elliott, born on April 26, 1967. Hendrix, however, was reportedly not the father, and Cass steadfastly refused to reveal who Owen's true father was. In 1971, following the breakup of the band, Cass married again to Baron Donald von Wiedemann, a wealthy Bavarian heir. That marriage collapsed just after a few months, though, and Cass was single when she died just a few years later. Owen, already fatherless, was just 7. Denny Doherty, meanwhile, went on to host a popular variety show in Canada, as well as perform in various formations of the New Mamas and Papas. He passed away on January 19, 2007, reportedly due to kidney failure. Michelle Phillips released an unsuccessful solo album and then switched gears and went on to a successful acting career, gracing the small screen in such hit shows as Knots Landing, Hotel, and Beverly Hills 90210. She continued to have numerous flings and has married several more times. She is currently the only living member of the original Mamas and the Papas. As for John Phillips, in 1975 he sobered up enough to put together the soundtrack for the film The Man Who Fell to Earth, a surreal venture featuring the talents of fledgling actor David Bowie and director Nicholas Roeg, who had previously collaborated with Crowleyite Donald Cammell on performance. At that same time, Phillips was working on completing a horrifically bad Andy Warhol-produced stage musical entitled Man on the Moon, which closed just 2 days after opening. Phillips at one time had Don Miami Vice Johnson in mind to play the lead in his space opera. Like the rest of the Hollywood notables in this story, Johnson was a canyon dweller at the time. His next-door neighbor happened to be a guy by the name of Chuck Wien, an avid occultist and a buddy of Warhol who, in addition to managing bizarre nightclub acts, directed the 1972 documentary Rainbow Bridge. Wien shared a curious nickname with fellow canyonite Charlie Manson, the Wizard. For the remainder of his career, Phillips' musical output consisted primarily of occasionally writing songs for and with others. His most well-known contribution being his co-writing duties on Kokomo, recorded and released by the Beach Boys. In 1981, Phillips found himself facing charges on trafficking large quantities of narcotics. By his own account, he had an arrangement with a pharmacy that allowed him to obtain large amounts of narcotics without prescriptions. Daughter Bijou would later say that he had actually purchased the pharmacy, guaranteeing virtually unlimited access. The charges were quite serious. In Phillips' own words, he
Was looking at 45 years and got 30 days.
He began serving his sentence, appropriately enough, on April 20th, and he was released just 3.5 weeks later. It never hurts to have friends in high places. Phillips' circle of friends in the post-Mamas and Papas years included J. Paul Getty Jr., Bobby Kennedy Jr., and Princess Margaret. Getty and Kennedy, both plagued by demons of their own, were likely being supplied by Phillips. Another name in Phillips' Rolodex was Colin Tennant, the wealthy heir of a massive petrochemical conglomerate in the UK. Tennant owned a private island in the British West Indies where wealthy friends like John Phillips and Mick and Bianca Jagger could engage in unknown activities in complete seclusion. Upon being released from his preposterously short period of confinement, Phillips put together a version of the Mamas and Papas that included daughter Mackenzie Phillips and original lead vocalist Denny Doherty. Scott Mackenzie, who had summoned all the runaways across the country to come to San Francisco with flowers in their hair, later replaced Doherty. Laurie Beebe subsequently replaced Mackenzie Phillips, after which Doherty returned once again to replace John Phillips. The band finally called it quits in 1994. Phillips had divorced Waite in 1985. In 1992, he received a liver transplant and a new lease on life. Just months later, he was photographed drinking in a bar in Palm Springs. In 1998, Phillips and the other surviving members of the Mamas and the Papas were introduced into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 3 years later, on March 18, 2001, Phillips died of heart failure. The saga wasn't quite over, however. Phillips's daughters would carry on with the family tradition, while spilling some dark family secrets along the way. Oldest daughter Mackenzie began her acting career at the tender age of 12 when she landed a role in what was to be George Lucas's breakthrough film, American Graffiti. Just a few years before, it will be recalled, Lucas had been an unknown cameraman at the Rolling Stones' notorious Altamont concert. During the filming of Graffiti in 1972, John Phillips, who I'm sure had lots of important business to attend to, and therefore a little time it took to look after his daughter, signed over legal guardianship of Mackenzie to producer Gary Kurtz. A few years later, in 1975, Mackenzie landed a role on what would quickly become a hit television series, One Day at a Time. During the third season, however, Mackenzie was arrested for public drunkenness and cocaine possession, after which her substance abuse problems continued to spiral out of control, causing frequent problems and considerable tension on the set of her hit show. Providing the template for Charlie Sheen to later follow, she was fired from her show in 1980. After 2 nearly fatal overdoses, she was invited back by the producers in 1981. The following year, she collapsed on the set and was once again fired. What had once seemed as a very prominent acting career was over as quickly as it had begun. From the late 1980s through the early 1990s, she performed intermittently with the reformed Mamas and the Papas. In 1992, she reportedly entered a long-term rehab program that she didn't emerge from for 9 months. Following that, she kept a low profile for many years. In August of 2008, however, she was arrested at LAX for heroin and cocaine possession, and on Halloween Day 2008, she entered a guilty plea and was once again sent to rehab. A year later, in September 2009, Mackenzie released her tell-all memoir, High on Arrival, which painted a disturbing picture of her late father. In addition to introducing her to drugs at the age of 11 by injecting her with cocaine, Mackenzie claimed that Papa John had graped her, without the G, on the eve of her first marriage, and had engaged in an incestuous affair with her that spanned a decade and ended only when she became pregnant and did not know who the father was. This scenario, it should be noted, with remarkable parallels to the ordeal endured by Michelle's surrogate mother, Tamar Hodel. John Phillips's memoir covering the time period in question made no mention of the illicit relationship with his daughter. He did, though, claim that Mackenzie was once graped, without the G, at knife point by an unknown assailant. He also noticed that, shockingly enough, Mackenzie's house in Laurel Canyon was destroyed by fire. That, as we all know, hardly ever happens. The year after dropping her bombshells, Mackenzie appeared on what was arguably the most appalling reality show ever to hit the airwaves, Celebrity Rehab, in a role far removed from her glory days in a primetime hit show. That same year, sister China Phillips entered rehab as well, although she was reportedly seeking relief from anxiety. China first captured the spotlight in 1990 as one-third of the vocal group Wilson Phillips, alongside Carney and Wendy Wilson, offspring of the reclusive Beach Boy Brian Wilson. That group, though, proved to be very short-lived, as did China's musical career. In 1995, China married actor William Baldwin. In 2003, she became what Vanity Fair described as a
fervent born-again Christian. She was baptized in brother-in-law Stephen Baldwin's bathtub.
The magazine also quoted China as saying that,
Being a mom is challenging for me. My perspective is warped.
like her older sisters, Bijou Lily Phillips, born April 1st, 1980, just a year before her father was harshly punished for running a major narcotics trafficking operation, she merged into the fast lane at a very young age. Her mother was addicted to heroin while carrying her, and Bijou, or Bijan, has candidly described herself as a crack baby. Raised partially in a foster home, she was reunited with her father by the courts when in the 3rd grade. That wasn't necessarily a good thing. Described by Index magazine as
A wild child who, through fate and circumstance, was somehow allowed to partake of New York's nebulous nightlife at an age traditionally more suited to playing with dolls.
Bijou was a cover model from a very young age. She was also the 14-year-old star of a Calvin Klein ad campaign that many people, as well as the U.S. Justice Department, considered to be bordering on child pornography, and that Bijou herself referred to as the kitty corn ads. Bijou told her interviewer from Index that coaching her and creepily lurking behind the scenes of that notorious Calvin Klein photo shoot, I'm guessing as a technical advisor, was this porn guy. The interviewer identified that porn guy as Ron Jeremy, who is not your run-of-the-mill porn guy, and not just because he is arguably the world's most famous porn star. He is also a very well-connected porn star. His mother, for example, was an asset of the OSS, precursor to the CIA. His uncle had ties to notorious gangster Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, and he attended high school with none other than future CIA Director George Tenet. Bijou had alluded to the fact that Mackenzie was not the only Phillips daughter to receive unwanted attention from Papa John. In her music can be found lyrics such as, "He touched me wrong." Asked directly about such references, she told an interviewer that she had
made this decision not to talk to the press about anything that's gone on in my life, but just to write music about it. They can interpret it themselves.
Though she quickly added,
It's blatantly obvious.
The youngest of the Phillips clan also acknowledged that she has a daddy tattoo on her rear.
That was done during a time
She said,
when I was a pretty sick puppy.
Bijou made her film debut in 1999 and has had a number of low-profile film and television roles since then. Most recently, she has had a recurring role on the television series Raising Hope as, of all things, a serial killer. She is currently an avid Scientologist. Many of the problems she has faced, she ultimately realized, stem from the fact that she'd
Never been shown respect by my parents. I'd always been treated like an object, not like a human.
And with that, we complete Chapter 18, The Wolf King of L.A., Papa John Phillips. I believe this is the longest chapter in the book. Thanks for watching my summary of
Weird scenes inside the canyon.
I think the author makes a pretty good point that John Phillips was deep state connected, and also that he was either a flash in the pan or he had help on the first album, and that he was an occultist and messed with his daughters. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next episode, which will be soon. Thanks for watching.
Military kids depart the hill, and into the canyon they will fill. They protest people who kill, but are they any different still? Weird scenes inside the canyon. Weird scenes inside the canyon.